Russian patriotism in the age of Putin. What does Putin stand for? Or what image does he present? And clearly he presents the image in his words, in his photo ops, of a Russia united and strong, the sense of statism of a strong Russian state, and that the strong Russian state is important for a strong Russian society. In part, this is a message that resonates with the Russian population because under Yeltsin, it was seen as a failure of the state to be able to handle the many challenges of this disintegration of the Soviet Union. And this failure of the state, this collapse and instability and economic ruin, will not be repeated with Putin. And Putin, along with many others of his generation, regret the rapid collapse of the Soviet Union, if not the collapse of the Soviet Union. And part of this rapid collapse of the Soviet Union that led to sort of the humiliation of the state and society was the military glory of the superpower. The Soviet Union collapsed also. So part of reviving the prestige of Russia is reviving the prestige of the military. And Putin does this by getting tough in Chechnya and building up the military. Military expenses have gone way up under his presidency, and also using terrorism as a way to crush his opponents, to justify actions against populations, and by linking terrorism with Islam, then creating a sort of an enemy of the state. Putin claims that what is necessary is the dictatorship of the law and managed democracy. And our readings have looked at what both of these terms mean. They are open to interpretation, and managed democracy is a democracy that is managed with the effective authority of Putin. And so democracy itself is sort of in question. There are the three R's that I think Putin aims for in terms of the stability of Russia, and that's to regain control, rebuild the nation, and renew pride. Putin, as president, has said that from the very start, Russia was created as a super-centralized state. This is part of its genetic code, traditions, and people's mentality. So for Putin, as for many Russians, a strong Russia equals a strong state. And we've looked at what makes a strong state throughout this semester. And part what makes a strong state is legitimacy. Without legitimacy, a state then has a difficult time, even with a great deal of violence, of remaining in control. So how to achieve this legitimacy becomes a question that we've looked at. It's through symbols that carry the message that is desired. It's through creating support, so creating unity, the sense of a united society, a united state, a united vision, and also the very effective use of vertical power from the top down for Putin to control local authorities, provincial authorities, governors of provinces, and that this vertical power then creates a hierarchy that relies on loyalty to continue in their career advancement. We've looked at symbols before and how symbols control public space. And as we've seen in the Soviet Union, as previously in Tsarist Russia, that the state sets the rules on how public space will be used. So the state then creates a state space rather than a necessarily civil space or public space. And within this space, the state promotes a master narrative of legitimacy and uses symbols to define and reinforce the legitimacy in spaces, in not just squares, but everywhere in society. You can see symbols reinforcing the legitimacy of the Russian identity and Russian patriotism, and this sort of reinforces the power of the state, which also raises a connection of the past to the present, especially if you want the past to remain silent. So there's the erasure of the past besides the celebration of it. And we've seen this in terms of the use of history in the post-Soviet Russia. But controlling public space, there's many options and varieties, and we've looked at those in terms of naming streets and creating monuments and holding demonstrations or creating associations and so much more. And so when you think about how the state uses the public space, also consider what the message is that's being sent. I find this sort of fascinating in terms of then the use and abuse of history and historiography. This is one of the most recent memorials that have been created in October 30th of 2017, and Putin is, along with Patriarch, not surprising in this photo op, and opening the first national memorial to the victims of Soviet-era political repression. And you might want to consider, why does he do this? What is the message being sent? On one hand, it is a message being sent that he will recognize that there were political repressions and to sort of correct the past abuses, but it's also perhaps a statement that there was this repression, this instability, this fear, and he has ended it, that the Soviet state has gone beyond this and is now sort of being accountable and accepting it. There are always sort of underlying messages with these sorts of things. Support. Putin has a variety of support, both vocal and just apathetic and indifferent. Probably one of the best forms for his support is Putin's party, the United Russian Party, which is the political party that rules Russia, the largest party in the Russian Duma, the party of power, and the super party in the State Duma. But again, you might want to remember that Putin does not run under this party's name. Also, the creation of youth organizations. You might recall in reading Sense, the role of Nashi, this youth organization that then is under the auspices of the Putin state. There's also protests against the state, and I wanted to just briefly look at the public and Putin and the civil society finding a voice, trying to regain control of some of these public spaces, which is very difficult. And this is a September 2014 demonstration, and by and large, many of these demonstrations were about pensioners losing their Soviet benefits, and the pensioners, the retired pensioners, the veterans were deeply hurt with the cuts in the Soviet benefits and protested it. There are other protests throughout this period of particularly the youth protesting electoral abuses and voter fraud. And this is an image of policemen detaining demonstrators in St. Petersburg in October 2017. And you might want to consider again, what do these images represent? This represents sort of disorder and the need to create stability and order. So what would the sort of ordinary Russian think when they saw such images? Ultimately, as is argued by Alfred B. Evans in his article, many Russians aren't protesting against Russia, against Putin. They want his help. Is they're protesting policies. They're not protesting Putin. There's a series of protests, and most of these are very specific in their outlook. There's the protests against ending Soviet-era benefits. There are protests against real estate scams where people give money up front for condos and such, essentially money for nothing. There are protests against land ownership, where these sort of large agro holdings or agricultural conglomerations grab land and begin to use it, and farmers claim that this land was theirs, they were using it, and these have led to tractor marches. The tractor marches have been blocked by the state entering into Moscow. There has been tractor protests over the federal highway toll, this federal tax against truckers and how many miles they go on highways, and a very effective way of showing their protest is slow-moving convoys on major routes, such as around Moscow, where traffic is just horrible. One of my favorite is the Blue Buckets Society, that attempt to create visibility about the corruption and abuses of officials in many ways, but one of the most visible ways was putting blue buckets on the hoods of their cars because the officials would have flashing blue lights on their cars that would allow them to go wherever they wanted to and abuse the conditions of the road. There have also been protests in Moscow over the demolition of hundreds of thousands of apartments, and I think we've also seen this in our readings of much of old Moscow being demolished and the Muscovites being upset about the so-called renovations that are going on in Moscow. In May 2017, more than 20,000 people participated in these protests. So there's an attempt to sort of create a space for democracy, and owning this space is essentially owning the image. And I just thought maybe you'd want to kind of look at this image and think about what is the image being created in this person being carted off by riot police in Vladivostok in 1917. It's supposed to be 2017. So what does democracy look like in Russia? Ordinary Russians, they are not really concerned about trying to make a regime change. They would like to have their Soviet benefits back, like free transportation, but they're not looking to change the regime. They're fundamentally conservative in outlook. They want protection of their property combined with Soviet benefits, and essentially their interests are NIMBY, not in my backyard. So it's about self-interest, and I think this is probably true for most of us, that motivates our protests. Alfred Evans argues in an essay in Return to Putin's Russia that most Russians do not believe that any form of popular participation in politics could produce fundamental improvement in the working of political institutions. So essentially, why bother? Why care? You're not going to make a difference anyway because it's rigged. In December 2011, there were protests against the electoral fraud that drew some 40 to 80,000 young adults. The people that do protest in sort of political demonstrations are typically young, educated urban adults that know how to use technology, and they don't really represent the ordinary Russians in their interests. So if there is going to be any kind of change or sort of accounting for the abuses of the state about freedom of press and other constitutional abuses, somehow there needs to be a connection to ordinary Russians. But how to make that connection? I think that Peter Kennens, in his last paragraph of his History of the Soviet Union from the Beginning to Its Legacy, sort of sums up where we're at this point. As he says, the chances for the development of a liberal, tolerant Russia integrated into Europe, where it really belongs, now seems more remote than at the moment when Putin came to power in 2000. If he suddenly died, it would not make much difference. Whatever is unattractive in the current Russian regime cannot be associated with the peculiarities of the character and personality of the president. The country's problems are more profound, and I think that's a really important point, even though there's that typo there. Darn! It's not just about Putin. Putin will be replaced by somebody else. And there will still be corruption. There will still be problems. And how will those be handled? So I guess I leave you with this slide of sort of the continuing issues and problems to be addressed that have been the problems by and large, you could argue, in the Tsarist Russian period, and the Soviet period, and the Yeltsin period, and the Putin period, and they continue to be problems that need to be addressed. So it's not just about the person in power. It's about structures. It's about institutions. And these problems that need to be addressed, they're about addressing what is the usable past. Which past will be used and for what purposes? How free will the press be allowed to be? What kind of environmental actions are going to be taken? Because the degradation of the environment, the incredible pollution that persisted in the Soviet period still persists now. What will be the relationships between Russia and its neighbors and the republics? How neighborly will they be? How coercive will the Russian state be, and how often will it use coercion? What kind of coercion will it use? The sort of soft power of oil and natural gas? What about the economy? How to fix it? And corruption, how to contain it? It's been a pleasure having you in this class. Take care.